Hey everybody, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a player that seems to do a 180 personality-wise when his friend group decides to try and play Dungeons & Dragons, demanding changes to the game that will benefit his cringy edgelord furry wolf character, and using the fact that his girlfriend is the dungeon master to do so. But before we get into the story, if you like what I do on this channel, I hope you consider giving the video a like and subscribing. If not for me, then how about for Lucky, the like and comment kitty? There we go. Who couldn't like Lucky? But with that, I think it's time we get into the story. And strap in, grab a snack, as it's a bit of a long one. Problem player, Sigma male, takes things to a physical level. By Reddit user, Throwaway98637. Hi all, this happened fairly recently. This is a story about a very deluded individual with a fortunate happy ending. I waited a while to post this because I wanted to talk to almost every party member to get the most accurate picture of what happened. It took a little longer because of school nearing the end of the semester for us all. I'm using a throwaway because the people involved are Redditors as well. If the player who is the cause of all this mayhem sees this, you know what you did. Please, I am asking you to step away from the internet and seek help. You need it. Marked NSFW for language and some adult themes. Note that this may be a long read. There are a lot of details that I feel need to be included, so here's a fair warning that if you don't like longer posts, just skip. TLDR just in case. A problem player makes a Wolfman edgelord rogue that acts really dumb and problematic, and attempts to take control of the party. He leaves eventually, but it took way too long. So I have a Discord server with 3 of my closest friends. Let's call them Dan, Bob, and Jess. We have been playing video games with each other for years, and recently wanted to get into Dungeons & Dragons. Around the time we wanted to start, Jess got a new boyfriend. We will call him Gunk. Gunk, at first, didn't seem like a problem at all. He was on the quiet side, but once he got used to us, he was talkative and friendly. As he was also a huge gamer, he played video games with us daily. Even in the competitive atmosphere, he never lost his friendliness towards us. To be honest, it was nice having a new person around to play with. Also, Jess and Gunk were a fairly closed-off couple. What I mean by that is that they never went into big displays of affection for each other when spending time with us to not make us feel uncomfortable. So why would I name him Gunk? Well, because for some reason, Dungeons & Dragons apparently was the key to unlocking his inner demons. We knew from gaming and hanging out that Gunk was a bit of an edgelord. He was always drawn to edgy characters and themes in the games that we played. We also later learned after this mess from Jess that Dan, Bob, and I all made him feel inferior. I say this because I think it provides insight into how his campaign-ruining character was created. Also, just a little side note, I believe edgelords aren't inherently bad. I think they can potentially provide interesting party dynamics. However, the way Gunk went about his character was just awful. Also, extra side note, this was everyone's first exposure to Dungeons & Dragons, except for Gunk, so we're going to make a lot of dumb rookie mistakes. Anyway, let's get into what happened. We all discussed playing Dungeons & Dragons, and invited Gunk to join us. Jess wanted to be the dungeon master, and got to work on a campaign with the help of her dad, who's a big Dungeons & Dragons veteran of over 20 years, while the rest of us made characters. We ended up having a session 0 with no input on what the campaign was about. Jess wanted to start with us waking up in a mysterious dungeon with no memory, but she didn't say that until we started. So session 0 was just us players making a party composition that was balanced, and sharing our backstories and such. If anyone wants to know, here is the lineup. me, a mountain dwarf fighter, Bob, a tiefling bard, Dan, a human wizard, and Gunk, a quote, wolf-born rogue. So one of these things is not like the others. Gunk homebrewed his race, as he described them as part wolf and part human with a tragic history. He had a +3 for dexterity and wisdom, +2 for strength, and a +1 for initiative, dark vision, and advantage to wisdom and dexterity saving throws. Jess, not knowing any better at first, said that his race was fine, but Dan was a little suspicious and eventually compared Gunk's Wolfborn to the other handbook races. Dan would then say that Gunk's race was absurdly more powerful than anything the handbook offered. When shown the evidence, Jess agreed and said that Gunk would need to figure something else out. Gunk grudge counter 1. Gunk was a little unhappy that Dan was so determined to ensure that his creative vision did not see light, and blamed it on Dan's distaste for tragic or dark themes in video games. Now, a little background as to why he said that is because Dan is in fact not a fan of edgy characters and such. He is fine with them being in games and all, but he's never one to actually ever take an interest or like to them. He thinks that they're dumb, and unfortunately, Dan faced a lot of domestic abuse and family death growing up. So when edgy characters go in depth about just how tragic and dark their backstories are, it hits Dan a bit differently. Thankfully, the group ruled that this wasn't just because Dan was not a fan, but because Gunk's race was a lot stronger than it should be. Jess went back and forth with Gunk, and they made a compromise. Gunk's wolffolk kept the bonus to initiative, and had a +2 to dexterity and a +1 to wisdom with dark vision. And he chose rogue as his class. Then came Gunk's backstory. Brace yourselves. I don't recall word for word what he said, but it went something like this. Abandoned at birth and raised by wolves. Quote, Malice learned the hard way about winning or you die, and forced himself to push all he had to keep up with his canine family. Some goddess of wolves granted him to be part human and part wolf, after recognizing his, quote, determination. Now, he seeks to bring glory, and conquer any challenge he comes across for his pack and goddess. Then, one day, he came home to his pack's lair to find them all dead, killed by human hunters. He killed them all, and now wears their hair as a coat, and now has a newfound bloodlust to fill the cracks of this broken man. He then went into detail about how he suspects only the loving embrace of a woman who accepts his wild soul could potentially heal him. I'm going to be honest, I was trying my hardest not to laugh. I was very glad that we were playing in person and not online. So yeah, that was our party lineup. I'm not including anyone else's backstory, because they don't really have too much relevance. With Session 0 out of the way, we set up a weekly time to play, and had a solid amount of good sessions. We did in fact wake up in a dungeon, and had to improvise a way out and fight off some basic weak undead enemies. When we found the light of day, we stumbled upon a village that was being harassed by a large goblin clan. The village elder offered a reward for us to scatter them, and gave us a forward payment to buy proper equipment, since the stuff we found in the dungeon was all improvised weapons and armor. Fast forward a few more encounters, and we get to level 3 and manage to track down the goblin camp. After some college-educated planning, we decided to just break in and rush into the camp. We found ourselves swarmed instantly by a huge number of goblins. Gunk went first with his high initiative and managed to kill a goblin in one hit, and he got a few good jobs from us. Next was Dan, who literally incinerated 18 of the little buggers with burning hands. We were all in ecstatic uproar by this. Jess's dad happened to be nearby when this occurred, and offered the idea that the rest of the goblins, save the chief, should be frightened for a few turns. Jess agreed, and our spirits were raised even higher. All except Gunk, of course, who spoke up about an apparent discrepancy. Gunk, Wouldn't they be frightened when I'm near them because of my imposing appearance? Jess's dad. Probably not. Gunk. What? Remember that my character is a 6'6" Wolfman with a peak physique. How would that not scare them? Jess's dad. Well, if you're trying to intimidate one of them, I'd probably give you an advantage. But goblins don't care what they fight. If they have the numbers, they will be confident in combat. Dan has taken that away, so now they are frightened. Gunk. I disagree, but okay. What if I killed their leader? Jess's dad. Sure, if the leader dies, I'm sure they will all be frightened in general. Remember though, that Jess is the dungeon master. What she says goes. Jess. I think they would be frightened. Gunk. Thank you. Gunk grudge counter 2. We ignored this outburst and continued the fight. I should note that the goblins were all level 1 to 2, but the leader was level 5. Despite the advantage that Dan had got us, we were still getting beat up pretty badly, and were running out of party healing with Bob's spells. Soon enough, the only party member capable of healing was Dan, as a necromancer with Grim Harvest. Despite our situation, Gunk has the bright idea to disengage and run past the horde of goblins to fight the chief on his own. Gunk. I bare my teeth at the chief, demanding a duel between the two of us. After a moment of silence, Jess. You do what now? Gunk. I challenged the chief to a duel. Jess. Okay, well, given your character's instincts and general knowledge of goblin behavior, you know it is unlikely for the chief to honor a duel. Do you still wish to continue? Gunk. Sure, he will need the help anyway. We proceed to watch a goblin chief bring Gunk down to 1 health in a single turn, with no way to heal. We all had to discuss what to do since having a downed party member would really hurt us right now. So Dan suddenly pipes up. Dan, I have a question. Grim Harvest says that I heal when I kill with a spell. Is there any way I could transfer my healing to someone else? Jess is silent for a few moments before calling her dad over. Jess's dad. That's an interesting idea. I would say yes, as long as you are within 10 feet of them, and you already have full health. We all then discussed the process of escorting Dan within 10 feet of Gunk, and doing our best to ensure that he doesn't get harmed. Gunk remains silent during this time. Our turns cycle, and Gunk moves away from the chief. I use a reaction to body block a shot that would have hit Dan, and Dan manages to reach Gunk, killing another goblin in the process. However, it seemed that Gunk was not a big fan of being helped. Gunk grudge counter 3. Dan, I would like to transfer my healing to Gunk. In character, he says, allow me. Gunk, in character? Save it, I don't need help. Dan, you're barely standing, my friend. Gunk, we aren't friends, get lost. It took the whole party to convince Gunk to grudgingly accept the healing. It saved his life as he took damage the next turn, but managed to stay up. Together, the party kills the rest of the goblins, and Gunk gets the final blow on the chief. Brace yourselves, there is another Gunk moment coming up. Gunk. Grr, this kill is mine. The treasure he holds belongs to me. Me. Are you joking? This was a team effort. You do not get all the spoils. Gunk. Huh, the cub dares to challenge his alpha? Gunk then howls loudly, and to his credit, he sounded a lot like a wolf, which is ridiculous for 2 reasons. 1, it's cringe as hell. Seriously, why do people do that? And 2, it means that he's been practicing. We are all then jump scared by Dan's Great Pyrenees barking like crazy in the background of his mic. Apparently, Gunk was loud enough to pass through Dan's headphones. We listen to Dan yell until his dog finally quiets down. Dan, I would like to respectfully request that you never do that again. Bob, Yeah, look, I'm glad you want to roleplay, but I don't think howling into everyone's ears is a good idea. Gunk: I understand. My sincerest apologies, everyone. He never talked this way before, so it caught me way off guard. Jess: the loot is also not all yours. It will be shared. Gunk grudge counter 4. We discuss the fair distribution of the loot, then head back, and the village elder offers a gift to each of us. I just asked for a sum of gold. I think Bob and Dan asked for some jewels, since the village was a mining village. Then Gunk asked for a night with the fairest maiden in the village. Jess awkwardly roleplays the village elder, saying yes, but refuses to go into detail, and tells Gunk that no one wants any details of this night that he spends either. We ended the session, and I immediately contacted Bob and Dan to talk. We all agree that Gunk's strange behavior was very out of place for him. I suggested asking to kick him, but Bob said that Jess isn't going to kick her boyfriend unless he does something blatantly outrageous. Dan and I agreed that Gunk asking his girlfriend for that kind of prize is outrageous, but Bob argues that no one got hurt or angry, and it wasn't our place to make rules for their relationship. And I figured, fair enough. The next couple of sessions were fine again, but we would learn later from Jess that Gunk wasn't having fun. He then suggested to Jess a new rule to be put into play. Jess agreed, not wanting to lose him as a player, and one session, Jess announced a new rule of experience distribution. Combat experience would now be distributed on a weighted scale based on how much damage you contributed. More damage, more experience. The call was silent before I spoke up. Me: how is that fair? Bob: yeah, we have 2 damage dealers in the party. Jess: well, I want to make sure that everyone is equally compensated for their actions in combat. Bob: okay, well, wouldn't I get extra EXP for healing and buffing? Me: wouldn't I also get extra experience for tanking and distracting enemies? Jess: no, I don't know how a working weight scale would work with that. Plus, damage is what actually ends the fight, so I think the emphasis should be put on it. Dan: I'm going to be honest. I don't see how this helps anyone. Gunk: what do you mean? Why are you all upset about it? It helps us, dude. We get rewarded for being good at our job. Anyone can just build a character to take a hit or be a musician playing behind us all. It takes skill to be a good damage dealer. Me: that's a dick thing to say, buddy. Gunk: I'm just speaking the truth. Dan: okay, before we start screaming at one another, let's step back. I am not upset at this rule, but I don't think it should be a thing. Dan goes pretty in-depth about why he thinks the rule is dumb. I am paraphrasing here, but he basically says that allowing him and Gunk to grow stronger will only hurt them in the long end, because the party needs each other. Having a weak tank and utility will bring a lot of pressure on them, and while they are the damage dealers, he points out that a lot of the damage that they do is dependent on the crowd control that Bob and I provide, specifically Gunk's sneak attack and its dependence on my positioning. To our surprise, after about 30 minutes of them talking, Gunk actually agrees with Dan, and the rule is abolished. Props to him for keeping us all calm and talking through the situation to a conclusion. So the session continued, and while Gunk agreed with what had happened, it still didn't fix the fact that he was not having fun. Now, his greatest crime spree would start. There was a week where neither Bob nor Dan could play that night because of school-related things, so Jess announced that the session was canceled. Except it wasn't. Gunk somehow convinced Jess to allow him to have a private session on his own, and he even made a second character, a paladin, to tank for him. He played both in his own private session, and was able to level up from it. You can imagine our surprise the next week when he pulled out 2 icons onto the digital board for his characters, which were both level 5, compared to ours, which were all level 4. The group was not happy, and only got incredibly frustrated when Jess explained what had happened. I don't remember the argument, but eventually, Jess agreed to revert his level back to ours. Gunk got to keep both characters, but was told that he couldn't play both at the same time. This somehow translated to Gunk that he could swap his characters out when he wanted, which was never discussed. During the middle of a fight, Gunk suddenly describes a glowing beam of moonlight shining on his character. We all hear a mighty howl of a wolf as his character shifts into a paladin of his wolf goddess. Dan, are you allowed to just switch like that? Also, I thought your characters were 2 separate people. Gunk, that was only for that one session. I think it makes more sense for my character to instead have 2 forms. Bob, okay, so back to what I was trying to say before. He just gets 2 characters that he can swap whenever? I get he's your boyfriend, but you can't give him special treatment like this. Gunk, I cannot believe you're pulling that card. A true sign of a cub. Bob, my man, I don't even know what the F that means. Gunk, it means you're stupid and immature. Also, you just proved both of my points. Dan, hang on. He's the stupid and immature one? You're trying so hard to play a Wolfman to the extent of practically howling and unironically adopting an alpha wolf lingo. If you want to be a wolf so bad, get out there, find a pack, and sniff their a-holes. Gunk Grudge Counter 5. The session did not last long after this, and we ended up taking a week break of not really talking to one another. When we did get back, the session did not last long either. We left off in combat and continued from Gunk's turn, and he stayed on his rogue. We were fighting 2 legendary orc warriors and managed to get one down. Gunk got the final blow on him and gave us a, "That's right, who's the alpha?" The other orc got really low, but not low enough for any of us to potentially finish it, save for Dan with an upcasted spell. I can't remember which it was, but I think it was Witch Bolt or Ray of Sickness. Anyway, Gunk went before Dan and did not like the idea of someone else getting a finishing blow on these enemies. Gunk, my turn, right? I sneak attack Dan, 18 to hit. Since he isn't facing me, I can pull it off. Jess, okay, roll damage. Bob, Dan, and I in unison. What? Bob, party members can't attack each other. Jess, I'm making an exception here, because Dan did go a little too far last session. Dan, you gotta be kidding me, right? Because Mr. Alpha Male got his bitchy feelings hurt, you're going to let him attack me? Jess, yeah, you went too far. Gunk, 32, he's down. Jess, alright Bob, you are up. Dan, I am not down. As a reaction, I use shield, which adds +5 to my AC, bringing it up to a 19. His attack misses. Jess, since it's a sneak attack, I'm going to roll that you don't have time to take a reaction. Dan, oh my god, it's so obvious it hurts. Okay, let me read the rules of shield for you. Casting time, 1 reaction, which you take when you are hit by an attack or targeted by the magic missile spell. An invisible barrier of magical force appears and protects you. Until the start of your next turn, you have a +5 bonus to AC, including against the triggering attack, and you take no damage from magic missile. This is straight from the rulebook. Gunk, you wouldn't have time to bring it up. My attack is too fast. Dan, for F's sakes, it literally says that the triggering attack is subjected to the new AC, which means your attack misses here. Gunk, you forget that my race is more powerful than your average realm dweller. My character is also blessed by a wolf goddess because of my determination. A strike like this would not be missed. Dan, and my dad could beat up your dad. I don't give a crap about your furry wolf wannabe badass. You don't get to change the rules. Gulk. Jess, control your a-hole friend, please. Me. Dude, you can't just petition the Dungeon Master to make whatever you want go just because she's your girlfriend. Gunk. Jess? Jess. I don't know what to do. Gunk. Okay, well, since you always take their side, and no one here is mature enough to take a hit to their pride, I'm leaving. This campaign sucks anyway. Bye. And there he went. He left the call in the Discord server. Gunk was gone. We were all speechless, and just said that she should go talk to him, and left. The rest of us remained in silence for a bit, before switching over to another game. To this day, none of us are sure what brought on this sudden and drastic change of character. Jess believes that it was insecurity, and the inability to accept that we were doing well in a setting where he thought he should have been the best. However, this story does have a good ending. Gunk and Jess did eventually break up, and I haven't heard from him since. We continued the campaign, with Gunk's character frequently appearing as a comedic relief mini-boss. We just finished the campaign about a week ago, and we all figured that this would be a good and fun story to tell. On another fun note, Jess's dad recently announced that his working hours were going to be reduced for a few months, and has offered to Dungeon Master a new campaign for us, and I am extremely excited to see what he brings to the table. One last thing I should mention is that while Jess may have made a lot of mistakes here, Gunk definitely took advantage of her. He used the fact that she tends to be a people pleaser, and that she had no prior experience with Dungeons and Dragons. We were not hard on her for taking a side, and she did apologize for what happened. It's also not really fair to be extremely critical of her, since we all made a lot of mistakes in this story. But that is all, and I sincerely appreciate you reading. It's kind of odd how Gunk changed his personality when it came to Dungeons and Dragons. First, trying to get an overpowered homebrew race past his Dungeon Master girlfriend. Thankfully, Dan was able to point this out, and Gunk had to make some concessions. Then there was the whole thing with him suggesting that the characters should only get experience and scale with how much damage they do during battle. Like Dan pointed out, that kinda leaves the support characters behind in regards of levels, and would only hurt the party in the long run. Stuff like this is why I personally prefer milestone leveling in games I'm in, as it leaves no one behind in regards of levels, and prevents the competitive nature to players to get experience when a party should be working together. It was also pretty clear that Jess was giving Gunk special treatment due to them dating, if her running a private game for him and letting him make another character to control is any indication, not to mention the level up. Now, did Dan go a tad aggro on Gunk at one point for talking down to the other players? I would say a bit. But for Gunk to take that and then try to sneak attack Dan because of it was petty, and the fact that the DM was going to allow it, again, shows that she was giving special treatment to Gunk. Then for Gunk to throw a tantrum and say that the campaign was stupid just before up and leaving was super childish, and an insult to Jess, who was running the game for all of them. Thankfully though, there was a happy ending to this one, as they were able to finish the campaign after Jess and Gunk broke things off. And the fact that Jess's dad, being a veteran of the hobby, is going to run a game for them has them all excited. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.